Welcome, everybody, back to the Friar Talk podcast and YouTube channel. For today's episode, we're going to be talking about potential trade deadline rumors for the Padres. Going to be going over a couple different guys that they could potentially add. A few names on the list right now for the Padres. And these are guys that are either rumored, have been mentioned, have actually been brought up by Jeff Pazan or a reporter like that. But the first few names I'm going to bring up, outfield options, got Ian Happ from the Cubs, Brian Reynolds from the Pirates, Tommy Pham from the Reds. I think that one, we're probably not going to talk too much about that. David Peralta from the Diamondbacks, Austin Hayes from the Orioles. And then there's also a couple other positions of need. People have brought up catcher. The only real catcher that would make any sense at all would be Wilson Contreras. We're not big fans of him, but we'll discuss him a little bit today. And then also right-handed reliever is another need. You have Daniel Bard on the Rockies. You got David Robertson on the Cubs. But really what you start looking at is you're like, okay, a deal with the Cubs makes a lot of sense. Or a deal for Brian Reynolds makes a lot of sense because, I mean, maybe a month or so ago, we talked about the trade deadline and how the Padres aren't really in a spot where they need to go get a bat. They need to go get a bat now. They desperately need an impact bat. They're 2-8 in their last 10. They've been struggling a lot. And if you look across the board, offensive numbers outside of Eric Hosmer aren't necessarily terrible, but there's no one really playing good. There's no one elevating this offense. So you're going to get Tatis back, but you're going to need another bat on top of that. And I think we've said that from before the season started that they are going to need another bat. So what do you guys think about those deals? And is there anything that, of these rumors that we're kind of bringing up, is there anything that you guys, any like potential deals that you think make a lot of sense for this team?
Brian Reynolds and Ian Happ make the most sense. Brian Reynolds makes a lot of sense because he is a switch hitter who can play center field. And when you look at the outfield, right field, you could argue is probably our weakest spot just because, Mazara's been playing great. But offensively, it has to be center field. Center field has definitely been our weakest spot. I mean, Trent Grisham, I don't know what his OPS is. I think it's below 630, maybe just hovering around 630. And I know his average is below 200. That's not going to cut it. Your defense can only get you so far. And I know he's got a lot of value as a center fielder because of his defense. And I do think he can become a successful hitter in the future. But right now, I think Brian Reynolds fits everything that the Padres need. Brian Reynolds is a switch hitter, though obviously there's primarily righties in the league, so he's going to hit a lot from the left side. And coincidentally, the Padres have a 669 OPS this season from the left side of the plate. So that would be a massive improvement considering Brian Reynolds' OPS right now is a 794, but it was like an 810 the other day. So maybe he's just going through a little bit of a slump, but last year had nine outs above average. This year he's in the negative, but obviously he's shown the ability to play some really solid defense. And though it might be a hefty asking price, it might have to start with CJ Abrams. If it doesn't start with CJ Abrams, it almost definitely has to start with Robert Hassel and some. That I think the Pirates should for sure listen to what the Padres have to offer. I think the Padres have a lot to offer. They have both Grisham and Hassel as outfield options, and then they got Ryan Weathers as a pitching option, Luis Campusano as a catching option. Now, in order to bring in Reynolds, you are going to have to clear up some space. You are going to have to get rid of maybe one of Myers, Hosmer, Lamet, maybe multiple of these guys. You are going to have to do that, though I do think that could prove easier. I think that could be somewhat easy. Not very easy. I think Myers would be the easiest to unload just because he not only will he be playing soon, but he's only got half a year left. Also, I believe he is the most expensive guy in the books right now. So I don't think it'd be very hard to unload him. It's also very hard to convince a team to want an outfielder who hasn't really played all season, but the Cubs aren't in a position to win. But yeah, I mentioned Ian Happ too. That definitely makes a ton of sense considering he does play center field. He's had a great season. But those two are the two guys at the part. I definitely think AJ Preller is going to be in on. I think he's going to be heavily in on Brian Reynolds because he does like to go after those studs, man. He loves swinging for the fences, and I mean, I like that. Sometimes it proves it doesn't work, but hopefully it works in this instance. Yeah.
Speaking of Brian Reynolds, I know a lot of people are also going to say, what about relief pitchers? I know we mentioned a couple. There's Daniel Bard on the Rockies, but if you wanted to go kind of a package deal, which kind of I think Preller is going to go, if you wanted to go with the Pirates, there is David Bednar, which he's having a really solid year, which ironically we had him, then got rid of him. I believe it was I think it was the Frazier trade. If not, it was the Musgrove trade. But he's having himself a really good year. He has a 2.37 ERA throughout the entire year. You could probably add him for cheap, although they were probably going to try to sell him a little high because he is having a really good year. He is one of the more premier right-handed relievers in the league right now. And he has a few years of control just because it's his first year in the majors. If you wanted to go another route where you wanted to add another outfield and pitcher, I'd probably go with the Cubs with Ian Happ, and then I believe it's David Robertson, which he's 37. He's a little bit older. He's had a really solid career in the MLB. I believe he's in the mid-2 ERAs. He's having a really good year, just all around good. You'd add your center field bat in Ian Happ. He won't be as good as Bryan Reynolds, but if you power from the left side of the plate, he'll be a little bit cheaper. Then you probably don't have to get rid of Abrams, or maybe you could get away with not giving up Hassel, but it's going to be one of those weird ones where the Cubs have been very, very high on Campusano, and if they end up trading Contreras away, I think that would be the perfect guy to go to the Cubs and be the centerpiece. So I think realistically, I would probably Cubs out with Ian Happ and then getting David Robertson, just because I think it makes sense for both teams because they can trade Contreras away to another team and get his replacement right away in Campusano.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of echo what you're saying, Chase, in terms of I feel like Ian Happ is the deal that makes a little bit more sense. David Bednar would probably cost a significant amount. I think he's under control for a couple years. Where David Robertson in that package, I think this is his last year of the deal, so like he wouldn't cost that much. He's also 37 years old. It's a clear half-year rental. So if you're looking to kind of get a package deal, and we were talking about this before, do the Pirates really want to get rid of Bryan Reynolds? Probably not. Like they're probably not really trying to push it. He has control for quite a few more seasons. And that's why if they do ultimately go and make a move for Bryan Reynolds, the discussions are gonna start at CJ Abrams or Robert Hassel. And I know Abrams is technically graduated from being a prospect, but he's basically a prospect still. One of your two top prospects. I definitely think that's kind of where they're at. For a Hap trade, it's really interesting and really intriguing for what they could do with the Cubs. We were just mocking up a couple deals. One of the ones that we had was you get Ian Happ, you get David Robertson, and then you give up. This is a weird package, so this would kind of vary on what you're willing to give up. But in this one, we have the Padres giving up Campusano, Grisham, Hosmer, and Weathers. So it's almost you get your reliever, you get your outfielder, you get rid of Hosmer, you free up that money, you're able to go re-sign Joe Musgrove. And people might be like, why would the Cubs do that? They're rebuilding. The Cubs aren't like the Orioles where they're rebuilding and they're not trying to eat money. The Cubs are cool with eating money. They'll pay a lot of guys. Look at their offseason last year. They went and they spent a lot of money, and they weren't looking to be good next year. They're looking to be good in a few years down the road. If them getting Hosmer means they're also getting Campusano, that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's also something that will probably get talked about too quite a bit, because Hosmer to the Cubs has been rumored. It was rumored a lot last season as well. And I bring up Eric Hosmer. I know a lot of people are like, dude, give up on Hosmer, man. He's not getting traded. That's fine. Then toss in Myers and give up less prospect capital, and it's a very similar situation. So I think you could go a lot of different routes with it. However, in this case, I do think if you add Ian Happ, I think it's really intriguing because you look at Ian Happ and Trent Grisham, right? I mean, their values are somewhat similar. Ian Happ is a better player, but he has 2 years of less control than Trent Grisham. Once again, that makes more sense for the Padres, and that makes more sense for the Cubs to have that flop or that those guys flipped. So I think that Ian Happ is ultimately like the guy that is probably going to be a Padre if I had to put money on anyone, just kind of guessing. And also the Cubs and the Padres have discussed a lot of trades in the past as well. So I think that, and that's also why I think the Pirates get brought up as well, where like it feels like some GMs, and I'm not trying to like spread a rumor here, but it feels like some GMs don't really like dealing with Preller. Like it just has come across that way. Pirates, Cubs are not one of those teams by any means. So I think that a trade here could make a lot of sense. So That's why ultimately I think you're more likely to see Ian Happ become a Padre. But Brian Reynolds is definitely the home run hit. Like that's the guy that if you can add anyone, if you want to really elevate this lineup, you go get Brian Reynolds and then you get Fernando Tatis back at the deadline. You have a stacked team. Couple of the things I'll mention, then we'll loop back around. Blake Snell's been talked about getting traded a lot. We've talked about it. We don't think it's a great idea to get rid of Blake Snell. I understand why he gets brought up of getting traded away, but you're selling him at the clear lowest point in his career. So I don't think that makes a ton of sense. But you are freeing up money. You could trade Nick Martinez. Nick Martinez is likely to opt out after this year. At least I believe so. I think he's going to get a better deal than what he has remaining on his contract. Sorry if I cut out a little bit there. He's looked really solid, but I don't know, man. I think it makes a lot more sense to trade Nick Martinez, who has his player option at the end of the year. Probably going to get a little bit more than him. You might not free up less money, but it makes a little bit more sense. And so that's where I'm at with this team. I do think that your number one upgrade, we said this a couple weeks ago, center field. Yes, Trent Grisham's a solid player. You need a better bat in the lineup. That's where you need a better bat. Mazzara Myers' platoon is not the worst thing in the world. You can also bring up catcher being a weak spot in the lineup, and I get the frustrations with Nola. Nola has been bad offensively, but I don't think trading for a half season of Wilson Contreras and ultimately you're going to give up a lot for him. I don't think that makes much sense for this team. And also look around the catchers around the league. The Padres they're pretty average in that department. So I think you go and you make an upgrade at center field. And finally, I'll throw one name out there just for fun. This isn't going to happen, but if there's any way possible that you could go trade for Mike Trout, you do it in a heartbeat. You give up the entire farm, you give up everything. All right. So that's the other thing I'll bring up. But that's not going to happen. You're not going to see Mike Trout get traded. But just for fun, wanted to bring up that. But anything else you guys want to touch on?
You never know with AJ Preller, man. You never know with AJ Preller. He's going to swing for the fences. We know that, especially because this is definitely a season the Padres should be contending. They should contend for the division. I know the Dodgers are a good team. They just lost Chris Taylor, though. They lost him to a fractured foot. I think the window's open. Yes, did we almost get swept by them? Yeah, we did. That sucked. That was the worst series of the year. But I think if we're able to contend with the Dodgers till the end, it'll be really good for this team, not only for now, but for the future, to know that they can contend with the top team in baseball. A couple other names that have been brought up, obviously Ramon Laureano. I looked up his stats right now. He's got a 333 on base percent, 338 on base percentage, 245 batting average. I think his numbers have been going up recently. That's another guy to keep an eye on because he does play center field. And he will probably be really like a lot cheaper than the other two guys that were mentioned. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. Another guy, though he doesn't play center field, is Andrew Benintendi. I don't think we'll be in on him just because Jurickson Profar has been playing pretty good. But Andrew Benintendi will be another name to keep an eye on. I ultimately think he will go to, like some like the Yankees or the Dodgers, something like that. But yeah, man, I mean, I'm really excited to see what the Padres have in store. And Wilson Contreras is really weird because catcher is a very weak position, not a very weak position. Jorge Alfaro has been fantastic, but he's a little banged up, and you don't really want to rely on Austin Nola back there all the time. Obviously he is a good catcher, but in terms of at the plate, he is very, 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 very below average. But also a half a year of Wilson Contreras is kind of tough to gauge because it might take a lot for you to get him. You're going to be in competition with other teams such as the Giants to be able to get him. And I don't know if the prospect capital should be allocated to that resource rather than a resource such as Brian Reynolds, or I mean, obviously Ian Happ would probably be in the deal maybe, but Wilson Contreras is kind of tough to gauge because he is a great hitter and you need an upgrade no matter what it is. No matter what it is, you need an upgrade in the lineup. Does Wilson Contreras provide that? Yeah, absolutely. But he would be gone at the end of the season. So you're getting 60 games out of him. And I don't know how worth it that is. Who else was there to talk about? I don't really know if there's anyone else to talk about. Blake Snell, it's very interesting because I know a lot of people are going to be saying we should sell Blake Snell right now because Tyler Mahle and who's the other guy? Frankie Montas. They just got hurt. So it's going to be even more of a seller's market. It might be even more inflated than last year's pitcher seller's market. Maybe, especially for a guy like Luis Castillo. Now, if you throw Blake Snell in the trade talks, you might get a lot out of him, but at the same time, I would still believe you're selling low. And I mean, He's got like what, a 4 or a 5 ERA. He's getting paid kind of a lot of money, but he also posts his best numbers after the All-Star break. Let's say Mackenzie Gore, and Mackenzie Gore has been solid outside of 2 starts. He's been great. But let's say Mackenzie Gore, I don't know, gets hurt because he's never thrown this many innings. We're already starting to see his velocity go down. Let's say he gets hurt or he starts to underperform. Having somebody like second half Blake Snell is going to go a long way because he's a lefty. He's a lefty, and you don't want to lose a lefty of that caliber. So I don't think trading Blake Snell makes much sense, but oh shit. Hopefully you're able to get somebody like Reynolds or Happ. I think that'll provide an immense upgrade in center field for sure.
Yeah, though I feel like AJ Preller would be the guy to trade Blake Snell just because, there's a trade package that he really likes. Like you said, there's always some guy that's really unknown that AJ Preller is like, oh, I must go get him. And it feels like it could be one of those guys like Brian Reynolds. It could be a high-end guy that requires Blake Snell to go. But I don't want to trade Blake Snell either because, I know we've mentioned this 1,000 times on this channel, but after this year, we are losing 3 different years, and we may be able to retain 1 or 2. Realistically, it's probably going to be Musgrove and Clevenger, which means if you trade Snell away next year, you only have 1 lefty in your rotation, which you always at least want 2, just because being able to alternate between righty lefty always helps. So you definitely got to keep Snell.
Yeah, and I don't mind the idea of like exploring a Snell trade that much. Like I think it can be all right. I just don't think there's going to be anything that comes up where it's like, oh, this team's willing to give up a decent amount for Blake Snell. Because at the end of the day, we have to remember like trading Blake Snell, like this team's trying to contend. Even if Blake Snell doesn't get his stuff together, like you're still trying to have moves where you have veteran players that have done it and proved that they've done it in the past. So it's just hard for me to like stomach a Blake Snell trade where like, I don't know, if we're looking at the postseason, who do you guys have more confidence in? Blake Snell or Nick Martinez? Blake Snell, right? It's not even close. Like, and that's not to discredit Nick Martinez. Nick Martinez has been fantastic. Nick Martinez has been excellent. That's why I think they might want to trade him because now because they weren't really banking on Mackenzie Gore this offseason. No way they were banking on Mackenzie Gore to be able to do what he's done early on. So I also don't have a problem if they just don't trade any of those guys either. Like that's also another part of it. But just in terms of the starters, I think it's fair to bring up. But I think that's probably going to do it. Isaac, you have one more thing?
Yeah, I was going to say, we are in need of a righty reliever, and Nick Martinez kind of just bumped into that bullpen role, he's been fantastic, man. He's been so good, and I think he's been even better out of the bullpen than as a starter. So, I mean, like you said, I would love to keep them all. Yeah, man, I'm hoping they still get another righty reliever just because, like, I've mentioned like 10 trillion times, I'm very uneasy and I don't feel very safe with the guys that are coming back. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say about Nick Martinez.
Yeah, also, I feel like Nick Martinez, we wouldn't even really be discussing him as much if he didn't have that player option and wasn't performing so well. Like, that's kind of he's kind of like put himself in a spot where he can opt out and go get more money and has also played well enough where you could trade him to a team and they could go, hey, man, we'd like a half year of this guy. If he comes back, that's great, but like, we think it's worth it. So interesting case with Nick Martinez because that is one of the strangest deals. We've talked about this deal, like one of the strangest deals I've ever seen. But props for him for balling out, and he's been a huge help for this team. But right now the Padres are slumping. They desperately need to add an impact bat. They need another bat in this lineup pretty badly, especially if you're trying to go win a World Series. You need a better lineup than what you're putting out there right now. So I think that's probably going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys all for listening. Tomorrow we're going to have an episode out in the morning about the Giants Padres preview. Who sneak peek the 2 teams that are slumping the most right now in the entire league. So pretty fun there. I guess you're meeting the Giants at a good time when you're struggling. Might as well meet them when they're struggling. So we'll talk about that series. I'm not sure what we'll be doing later on in the week. I know Sunday we'll end up having a series recap, but not sure what else we'll have on Friday or Saturday or if we'll even have a video those days. But thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you all very, very soon.